Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He comes to us from Florida. His name is Edward T. Haslam. If you're watching this on Rockfin, X Twitter, or Rumble, you'll see the cover of his book. His last name is spelled Haslam, and the full title, it's a long title, is Dr. Mary's Monkey: How the Unsolved Murder of a Doctor, a Secret Laboratory in New Orleans, and cancer-causing monkey viruses are linked to Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK assassination, and emerging global epidemics. And Mr. Haslam grew up in New Orleans, so he was there around where all these characters are. And the foreword is written by the great Jim Mars, who's unfortunately passed away. But Mary Sherman's an interesting character. Some people have heard her story, some people haven't. She's one of the mysterious deaths that happened after JFK's death on November 22nd, 1963. But also her friendship, like almost on the same block as David Ferrie, who I've done 2 shows about David Ferrie and some of these other characters, his involvement in this offshoot Orthodox church and how strange he was, and connected to so many other people. But Edward can talk more about that. So Edward Haslam, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And for people who hadn't heard your name or maybe not heard of this book, maybe you can talk about your background in New Orleans, your dad, who you have kind of a memorial to, or in memoriam in your book, and we can go from there.
Well, my father was a professor of orthopedic surgery at Tulane Medical School, and Mary Sherman was a professor of orthopedic surgery at Tulane Medical School. So that's how I first came to know this story. My father, and Mary would go to orthopedic conferences together and hang out, and they both liked to sit around and smoke cigarettes and drink scotch, and they were friends. Okay. And when she died, it was a big event in our house,
And that was 64, right?
That was 64. It was July 21st, 1964 is when they found her body. I think she died the night before on the 20th. But the point is, it's an unsolved murder, but it was taboo to talk about for 30 years. And I finally got my hands on the hard documents, being the autopsy, and finally got my hands on the crime scene photos. And it became very obvious to me, just as I'm not a forensic professional, but I am a logical thinker, that she could not possibly have died in her apartment. And that was because her entire right arm and right rib cage down to her hip bone was disintegrated.
Right. And that wasn't the public story too at the time. Is that correct?
No, the public was never told any of this. And so what we have here is a conspicuous cover-up. And I knew enough about her through my family she was from the University of Chicago. She was good friends with Enrico Fermi, one of the fathers of the bomb. And she was doing something really strange down at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital. And so I started looking into all this, and I went through, and Jim Garrison, of the guy that investigated the Kennedy assassination, Oliver Stone made the movie about, he talked about her in his Playboy interview. And when I finally got my hands on the autopsy documents, it was very clear to me that she died in an electrocution. And I say that because she was identified by her hair. Now, hair is the easiest thing to burn on a body. We've all burned it on our forearms around the gas stove, etc. But her right arm and rib cage, specifically rib cage, was disintegrated to the point where the cops on the scene could see her internal organs. But the hair next to it, her pubic hair, her leg hair, etc., were all there. So how do you get the thousands of degrees of temperature required to disintegrate bones next to unburned human hair? I mean, that's the
Right. Like, how does that happen?
forensic puzzle here.
Right.
And so I started digging in and digging in and digging in. It's electricity, lots of it, thousands of volts of electricity, maybe millions. What happens is the electricity, and I'll talk about how it got into her in a minute, but there's so much of it and it's so hot that it explodes the water in the bones. And so everything is, I mean, this is not like cooking a Thanksgiving turkey. This is like instant and immediate amputation. But it didn't cross her heart. So her heart was still beating. It may have been the only part of her that was alive, but someone who was there with her, apparently someone with medical training and medical equipment, decided to terminate her as a mercy killing.
Interesting. So
they stabbed her in the heart with a surgical, like, scalpel. Go ahead, William.
Just to make sure she was dead. So she was killed somewhere else, brought back to her apartment, and then they tried to stage the scene to make it look like a fire. Is that correct?
Yes, and a psycho slashing. Her stab wounds, most of them, were done post-mortem. You know, because you bleed when you're alive and you don't bleed when you're dead. That's not very difficult for a trained forensic person to figure out. So she had 7 or 8 stab wounds on her, which did not bleed, but she had a stab wound to her heart that bled. And the blood was in the pericardium sac. So they know that that's what happened in, you know, I mean, what did that? The toaster? I don't think so, you know. And so I kept after this and eventually wound up with a linear particle accelerator, which is a very high voltage piece of equipment used in scientific research, which had been installed over at the U.S. Public Health Service hospital that she had access to. And somebody, in my opinion, sabotaged the machine because they were trying to out this project that they were doing. And what was the project? They had started on a fairly well-intentioned and benign but very secret operation to develop a anti-cancer vaccine because, and this is the big because, these people, these doctors, all knew about the contamination of the polio vaccine with cancer-causing viruses. Now, that's like the biggest mistake in the history of government.
Right, the SV40 virus or whatever, the monkey virus?
SV40 was one of the monkey viruses in the vaccine. The other one was SIV, which is the simian immunodeficiency virus, which is the ancestor virus to AIDS. Now, these geniuses were irradiating test tubes full of the polio vaccine that contained both SV40 and SIV.
Gotcha. So they didn't want that to come out because that means that the millions of people were exposed to this this
mandatory
cancer.
vaccine.
Yeah, right.
Which is like, I mean, to me, it's the biggest mistake in the history of government.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible to think, yeah. So she was involved.
So they were trying to fix that, and as they were doing this in the early stages, in the 1959-1960 stage of this operation, they were mutating this, looking for a benign strain of SV40 that could be used for a vaccine. Okay, and what happens right about that time is that Castro takes over Cuba, and the CIA goes nuts with trying to assassinate Castro. And somebody comes up with the brilliant idea that since the viruses are not getting weaker as they expected, they're getting stronger, they could use this as what's now called gain of function, or they could weaponize what they were doing to create an injectable form of cancer. And meanwhile, telling the world that, cancer could not be caught or communicated, it's genetic and all that stuff. So they preloaded their excuse on this. But by 1962, when you've got the Cuban Missile Crisis, and New Orleans, where all this takes place, it was within the range of those missiles. And New Orleans has a very deep, quote, anti-communist streak in it. And a lot of the Cubans, Cuban aristocracy, if you will, that fled Cuba, came to New Orleans. And one of the key figures in New Orleans was this wealthy and famous doctor by the name of Ochsner, who founded the Ochsner Clinic. And I've got his file from the intelligence agencies. He was a spook doctor since World War II.
Interesting.
And is famous for calling communism a disease, that must be eradicated. And I eventually figure out who's involved in this thing, and I have witnesses. And they said Dr. Ochsner was running this underground medical laboratory operation at the time that the CIA decided to weaponize it.
Gotcha. So they were trying to weaponize. Yeah, go ahead.
What happens is my phone rings, and it's 60 minutes. And they're telling me that they're investigating a woman who says that she was the technician in the laboratory, in the underground medical laboratory that I wrote about in Mary Ferry and the Monkey Virus. And I was very interested to hear what she had to say, And so it turns out that she, who was a what's the word? One of the prodigies, the whiz kids,
right,
that had been developing cancer research when she was still in high school that was outperforming NIH. And so Ochsner gets her set up with his friends up at Roswell, not New Mexico, but Roswell, New York, which had the oldest and largest cancer research hospital in the country, where she was trained to handle cancer-causing monkey viruses. So when they needed someone to come to New Orleans to assist Mary Sherman in this later phase of this thing where they wanted to weaponize it, they needed someone who was trained and knowledgeable. And they brought in this woman, Judith, from Florida. And she met personally with Ochsner. And at the same time, Ochsner was meeting with Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay. And Oswald was assigned as a kind of babysitter, bodyguard, to this Judith woman so that she would find her apartment when she's supposed to. She'd be introduced to the right people for the project, and you know, all that stuff. And so what I was left with was this understanding that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was of course famous for being accused of the JFK assassination, was actively involved in the development of a cancerous biological weapon, which they tested on prisoners up in
Was it in Louisiana where they were testing it?
I'm missing the name of the prison right now, but yeah, it was right outside Baton Rouge, and in East Feliciana Parish, and it's in the JFK movie, and they pulled some Cuban off of death row. I mean, see, they were killing the mice, and they said, well, that's interesting, let's get closer. And they started testing it on monkeys, and they were killing monkeys with cancer. And then they said, well, the real question here is, will it kill a human, particularly a Cuban? Okay,
right.
So
Castro.
It was arranged that they pulled a prisoner off a death row and brought him over to this hospital in Clinton, Louisiana. Actually, is in the next town down, but Clinton is the famous incident where Oswald was seen.
Oswald was supposedly seen with Ferry and with Shaw, right?
Yes, and another person who was like an orderly at the hospital, who helped them get in and out. I mean, this hospital is a hospital for the criminally insane. Okay, so it is not, you're not going to visit your Aunt Nellie in the hospital so she can see a smiling face. You got to go through guards, and they got barbed wire around it and all that kind of stuff. So what they did was they had this employee of the hospital who they would pick up right before they drove over to the hospital. And since he was wearing the uniforms, et cetera, they would wave him in and they would get in with him. And that's how they brought the biological weapon into the hospital. And the guards, the prisoner was brought in separately from Angola. And so they got there, and Ferry, I believe, injects the prisoner with this biological weapon that they've developed. It's a sauce at this point. And what happens is they have to see if it kicks in, if it works. And it takes 48 hours for that to happen. And there's a special blood test that only a handful of people in the entire country know how to do. And one of them is Judith, because she learned that up at that cancer research place in New York. And so 2 days later, Lee Oswald drives her up there. It's like the end of August. And she does the blood test and sees it's a titration type blood test, but she sees that the cancer is kicked in. And it is very obvious to her that this guy is on his way out. He's going to die before long. And she didn't really volunteer to kill people. She killed a lot of rats, but killing people is different. And so she goes back, and she's a strong-willed and high-minded woman, and she complains to Oshner about this. And she makes the mistake of putting her complaint in writing. Okay? And Oshner kicks her out of medicine, throws her out of town. says she's lucky to be leaving with the teeth in her mouth.
Wow.
And she goes back to Florida with her husband because she's been carrying on this extramarital affair with Lee Oswald, even though they're both married. But they were seeing each other on a regular basis because he was her bodyguard, and he was the one that would get her over to Ferry's apartment and home and stuff like that. And they both worked down at the Riley Coffee Company in downtown New Orleans, across the street from the congressman who ran the Un-American Activities Committee.
Wow.
And
hey, Ed, could you do me a favor? Can you try to turn off your video? There just seems to be a tiny bit of lag. So it'll just increase the data thing. You just go to where it says stop cam and just hit stop cam on the browser. Just hit stop cam, yeah. Perfect. Oh, there you are. He just dropped off. Yeah, so there's in his book, there's a lot of maps, and the Riley Company was right across from where Bannister worked. So it's kind of like very close to all the stuff. There's maps in Ed's book that cover all that stuff. But it is weird. And we know Ferry, he had like a building, or his house, he had like a whole floor of it was for animals, for his rats and mice and stuff like that. So it's pretty incredible. And I think that at one point, Ferry and Sherman were on the same block. Like I think they were within a stone's throw. And it's just kind of a strange thing. Like if you listen to my Ferry shows, you know that Ferry didn't die until the Garrison investigation kind of took off. Like his timing of his death was incredible. So Sherman died before Ferry. Sherman died 64. I think Ferry died in 67 or 68, something like that. But yeah, this is just another murky part of the whole JFK assassination. Just the Sherman story is really something else. Still unsolved, still, not figured out. And even the Alton Oxner stuff is still, I don't know where that is. The Oxner stuff is pretty incredible. But there's all kinds of things going on in New Orleans, and the cap materials covered in this book. Picture of Oswald and Ferry together. And, Ferry is just an incredible guy, and just, it's weird. I want to ask Ed more about his friendship with, there we go. Okay, you're back. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you fine. Thank
you. Good.
I turned off my camera and it turned off my microphone at the same time.
Okay, you sound better now. I was just talking about Ferry and his connection. We know he had a whole floor set aside for his own experiments, his own mice experiments. I mean, the guy was it was
in the house across the street.
Can you talk about that, his connection to Mary Sherman?
Yeah. Well, they had met somehow and were friends. And, Mary was brilliant and David was brilliant in his own way. And they shared intellectual interest. I mean, Ferry was very gay, and Sherman, I don't think was. But the point is, they worked together on this project under the sponsorship of Dr. Oshner. Now, the point that I want to focus on here is, since we know that Oswald was involved in this bioweapons program, when they say, oh, we've released all of the JFK documents. Oh, yeah? Did you release the documents about Oswald and the biological weapon? Because I think that's relevant. And the answer is no, they haven't. And the documents I sent you from the family jewels make that very clear. Now, what the family jewels are, this is a document produced in 1973 by the CIA, by the Howard Osborne, the director of security. It was restricted the management committee, and it was eyes only. And let's go down to page number 5. We're on page number 2 right now. Here we go. The family jewels. Now, notice this is not my term. This is the CIA's term for the items in this memo, which are either illegal because they violate the 1947 legislation that created the CIA, or they're very embarrassing to the CIA. Now, there are a total of 8 jewels, and you'll see the 7 and 8 on the next page. But they have things to do like with assassinating Fidel Castro and Operation Project Mockingbird, and spying on the political conventions in Miami and stuff like that. But if you look at jewel number 1, and the time frame of this, let me say, is between March of 59 and July of 64, which is the month that Mary dies. So this is the exact time frame that this linear particle accelerator was installed and operated on the grounds of the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital. That's federal property, okay? And jewel number 1 is 100% redacted. I mean, why is it jewel number 1? It's probably the most important thing on the list. There's something the CIA does not want you to know. And if you scroll down a little bit further to find the text part of jewel number 1, keep going. All right, that's a blank. There we go. That page, secret eyes only, 100% redacted. Next page, 100% redacted. Next page, 100% redacted. There is something they don't want us to know about what they did in that time frame, which my research leads me to conclude had to do with the mutation of cancer-causing monkey viruses, which were paid for through the CIA's money laundering operation. I know people who knew the people that installed this stuff, and they said what was unusual about this particular project was, I mean, this is from a guy who's installed 12 of these things, that the financing was always kind of on the table and above board, and was set out like a mortgage, and you know, over 10 years you'd pay off this $100 million machine. You know, this one was paid off in 1 week from checks from 6 different banks. Who's got that kind of money? You know, that's money laundering, big time money laundering. And my point is, until they release family jewel number 1, they have not released everything about the JFK assassination.
Right. It's not all there. And they haven't gone through all the recent files, to my knowledge, in totality yet. There's so many files. But
yeah, there's like 14,000 files, and they've, you know, released 1,400.
You can't trust them to release everything. I think that's pretty evident. Yeah, it's incredible. And how did Sherman know Ferry?
There's a lot of things in that world that look accidental but aren't. They met, quote, accidentally over at what was called at the time the Crippled Children's Hospital, where my father and Mary Sherman would go frequently. I mean, that's where they put the kids who had crippled with polio, etc. And Ferry, who would show up there with toys and stuffed animals and to give to the kids, apparently met her there. I don't think that was accidental, but that's the story on where they met. Um, you know, she was a professor. um, and he was a loose cannon political radical who was clamoring for the assassination of Fidel Castro at public events. Um, so their connection was not very visible to the people around them because it was very secret. But she would go over to his house and pick up samples. See these live mice, which were in the house across the street. They would bring over to Ferry's kitchen, where they were killed and autopsied, and they would cut out the tumors. And what they were looking for was the big, fast-growing tumors. And they put them in a blender. And then they put all these things into test tubes, and Mary would take them back to her apartment, which was down the street a bit on St. Charles Avenue, and examine them with her high-powered microscope, and then take them over to other microscopes in the loop in New Orleans. And when they had found out which ones were the most promising, they would send them back to Ferry to re-inject into more mice. So, and go through this process again. So every time they went around the block, they got back a more and more powerful biological weapon. And this, is a hugely important subject as far as I'm concerned, because they were exposing these things to radiation. I mean, when Mary would take them back, she would re-expose them to more radiation from the linear particle accelerator. So they're mutating monkey viruses to make them more powerful. But they're doing it because of the SV40. But SV40 is like a basketball, if you will, and SIV, the simian immunodeficiency virus, is like a golf ball. It's much smaller. But it's very difficult, particularly in the technology of the day, to hit one and not hit the other. And what you've got is ionizing radiation going through these test tubes with both SV40 and SIV in there. Now, the punchline here is that SIV is the ancestor to HIV. And in my book, I went through all that, and I got my information on that from Scientific American, where they actually had diagrams and charts on what was the difference in the genetic structure between these two things. And basically, a part of the DNA or it's RNA, I guess, in the SIV got mangled. And so once you mangle it, everything that is a descendant of that virus is mangled. And so it was my contribution to this "where did AIDS come from" conversation, was that it was due to a laboratory experiment involving radiation, trying to do something to lower the lethality of SIV, SV40, but in the process mangled SIV and turned it into HIV-1.
Wow. So you think that this research that was being done by Sherman led to the HIV catastrophe?
Well, it's a reasonable candidate for that. And I listed all the theories that were available at the time I wrote my book. And it is, in my opinion, the most likely scenario. And the fact that they were not trying to create HIV, but they were using a dangerous technique of shooting gamma ray radiation through test tubes that contain various viruses. And you don't have to be a genetics expert to realize that radiation can mangle DNA. I mean, they've been known that since Hiroshima, you know.
Right. Incredible. Ed, we are at the 35-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, until we know what. No, I'm just saying, you know, it's what I want to call people's attention to, since the media seems to be focused on the release of these JFK files, is that unless they tell us what's in family jewel number 1, they haven't told us everything. And family jewel number 1 may have to do with Oswald and the assassination of Fidel Castro, but it may also have to do with these global epidemics we have encountered since, due to the dangers of mutating cancer-causing viruses with radiation.
Wow. Wow. Ed, we are at the 36-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed?
No, I'm good.
Where can people find your book?
Well, it's on Amazon, and there's a hard copy, soft cover, and there's an audio book, and of course it's on the electronic things like what do they call it on Amazon?
Kindle version.
Yeah, there's that. So if you have a Kindle, you know, you can get a cheaper version of it. But it's, you know, the book has been out for a number of years now, and it still sells very well.
Yeah, people are still Amazon. Interested.
And,
yeah, there's.
It has what they call legs, you know, and it takes a little bit of almost. You have to get ready to read the book. You have to have enough knowledge to know what you're reading, but it's all there, and I tried to make it as straightforward and clear as I could. And you know, we have 2,000 ratings on Amazon and 2,000 ratings on Goodreads, and the ratings are all up there in the 4 dot somethings. And you know, it's I've had people tell me it's the best book they ever read.
Wow.
You know,
that's
so I hope you get it. I hope you check it out. I hope you enjoy it.
And where's the best place? Do you have a website, or is there a way people can reach out to you or contact you if they have any other additional questions?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's drmarysmonkey.com, but spell out doctor, DOCTOR, Mary's, no apostrophe, just Mary's monkey.com. And there I've got all kind of interviews, videos, my interview with Jim Mars that we did originally, and a presentation that I made to, that's it right there. And the presentation that I made to the library in Jefferson Parish, right by Ochsner's Hospital, where we had an overflow crowd, if I can put it that way. And there's other people there like Chauncey Holt, who is the guy that made these fake Secret Service credentials for Daley Plaza. He's also the guy that made Lee Oswald's A.J. Heidel things. And he's actually in a photo with Lee, and he was coming out of Lloyd Cobb's office in the ITM building. Now, Lloyd Cobb was Clay Shaw's boss. He's the guy that founded the ITM. And Chauncey was Meyer Lansky's accountant.
Wow.
So you've got a connection between these highly plugged in CIA people and the mob. And in fact, Chauncey says the way he got to work for the CIA was Meyer Lansky made a phone call and said, "Here's my guy. I'm going out of the country. Take care of him." You know, and Chauncey was a sniper, a pilot, an artist, and involved in all kinds of things. He's a very fascinating guy. That portrait you're looking at right there is one that he did. And there you go.
That's him. There's a full documentary. People can find out about that if they want. There's just so many interesting characters involved with this whole story. It's just incredible. But anyway, that was thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Family jewels and stuff is interesting. Like, where's all the other information? But people can go to this website. I'll put links to the website in the show notes. And again, the full title is Dr. Mary's Monkey: How the Unsolved Murder of a Doctor, a Secret Laboratory in New Orleans, and Cancer-Causing Monkey Viruses are linked to Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK assassination, and emerging global epidemics. And the author, again, is Edward T. Haslam. Thank you so much for your time.